Good afternoon, and welcome to today's luncheon. Today, I'm delighted that we're going to have a fantastic panel to talk about women in the boardroom. Is Hong Kong leading or lagging in Asia? We have a fantastic panel of speakers set up for you today. We're going to have Vivian Lam from Paul Hastings, Deirdre Lardner from Towers Watson, Alice Au, who's a board member at Spencer Stewart, and the wonderful Sue-May Thompson from the Women's Foundation. I'm delighted to welcome you all here on behalf of AmCham. My name is Anne-Marie Balfe. I'm one of the Board of Governors with AmCham, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all today. If I can just quickly run through some very quick housekeeping for you all. For those of you who have mobile phones or multiple mobile phones, please switch them off or put them to silent. If I can do a quick shout out from an AmCham point of view, you all have badges on you today. I've got a red one, which is that I'm on the Board of Governors. Some of you have grey badges, some of you have blue badges. If you have a blue badge, you are a member. If you have a grey badge, we encourage you to become a member. We host a large number of events throughout the year, and we have a number of committees that some of you may be very interested in joining. I was, up until very recently, the co-chair of our Women of Influence Committee, and we run some fantastic events focused on women in the Hong Kong workforce, or women in the Hong Kong environment, and we'd love for more female participation. So I encourage you all to become members. And with that, I'm going to sit down and let you eat your lunch. Please continue, and then I'll invite Sue-May up later on, who will do a full introduction of the panelists and the topics that we're going to talk about today. So please enjoy your lunch, and I'll speak to you later. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Are you enjoying your lunch? I think we might get started with the program, if that's all right. Hello, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sue-May Thompson, and I'm CEO of the Women's Foundation. Very warm welcome to today's AmCham panel on women in the boardroom. Is Hong Kong leading or lagging in Asia? Now, at the Women's Foundation, one of our main goals is to increase the number of women in policy and decision-making roles. So this topic is a very important one for us. So much so that, as some of you know, we founded the 30% Club in 2013. It's a group of chairmen and senior business leaders who are committed to bringing more women onto Hong Kong corporate boards. And in addition to the 30% Club, at TWF, we're also working with a wide range of stakeholders, including search firms, regulators, professional training firms, the media, and our growing list of very talented women to watch to promote the supply of and the demand for women on boards. So today's discussion is really timely, given the release by Community Business, and I'm thrilled that Fern is here today. Community Business yesterday released their latest survey of gender diversity on Hang Seng Index company boards. And looking at the 50 HSI listed issuers, HSBC has the most diversified board with 35% female directors, followed by the Link Management at 31% and China Resources Power at 27%. That's the good news. Just 11.1% of the entire pool of 655 directors across the 50 Hang Seng Index companies are women. Just 11.1%, up from an appalling 9.6% in 2013. Among the 109 new directors that were appointed last year to these 50 companies, just 12 of them were women. And most of these new appointments were confined to just 4 companies, who between them appointed 6 of the 12 new female directors, and they were the Link Management, China Mengniu Dairy, Galaxy, and Lenovo. 25 companies, including Swire and Chung Kong, saw no change in the number of female directors on their boards, and 8 companies, including MTR and Bank of Communications, saw the percentage of women directors decline as they increased the number of directors overall, but didn't increase the number of female directors, so the proportion went down. But the bottom line is this, that 14 out of the 50 Hang Seng Index companies still don't have any female directors at all. So while the Community Business Report only looks at 50 companies, and there are some 1,500 listed issuers in total on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, these are Hong Kong's biggest blue chips and should arguably be showing the way when it comes to the topic of board diversity. The numbers show, though, that many of the market leaders continue to be reluctant to appoint more women to their boards. So to help us make sense of this, I'd like now to invite our panelists to come up. We're going to have a panel discussion, then we're going to open the floor to Q&A, so please get ready with your questions and remarks. Vivian, could you come up, please? So Vivian Lam, we have a partner, Vivian Lam, in the corporate practice of Paul Hastings. She practices primarily in the area of financing, debt issues, cross-border acquisitions and investments, PRC companies and financial institutions in relation to REITs and their listings in Asia. So welcome. Deirdre Lander, Director of Data, Surveys and Technology for Hong Kong at Towers Watson. She also serves on the board of OBE Organic. She's worked across a host of different industries, including banking, financial services, consumer products, hospitality, transportation, and education. And last but very much not least, Alice Au, member of Spencer Stuart's Global Board of Directors. She leads Spencer Stuart's private equity practice and co-leads the board practice in Asia. So I'm going to kick off, as I said, with a few questions, and I'm going to start with Vivian. Vivian, we heard the latest statistics for Hong Kong. How does this compare with other parts of the world?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, diversity is still not the top priority issue for corporates in Asia and in Hong Kong. According to a survey by McKinsey in 2012, less than 1/3 of the respondents think that priority is one of the top 10 main issues that they're focusing on. And although Hong Kong does slightly better, Sume just told us that the latest statistics show that there is about 11% representation of women on corporate boards on the 50 largest listed companies. Hong Kong does slightly better than some other countries in Asia, like Singapore, which is at 8%, India, which is 6.5%. But if you look at the whole spectrum, we still, as a whole, Asia as a whole, lags significantly behind other countries. For example, at the top end of the spectrum, the Nordic countries like Finland, Norway, Denmark, we're talking about 40% representation. Of course, those countries are being helped by having quotas, which, basically force companies to increase their percentages. But compared to those countries, we still lag behind. In the middle are countries like UK, US, Australia, but then Asia generally are 10% or less. So I think there's still significant work to be done to improve the representation of women on corporate boards.
So let's get to the heart of the issue. Why are the numbers so low? So Deirdre, you've worked across many sectors. Are there particular sectors that are more female-friendly, and are there other sectors that are more resistant to women advancing into senior executive and non-executive roles?
Thanks, Sumay. I'm here today really talking about my role as a board director with OB Organic. My other role, where I'm called a director, is with Towers Watson, and that's more of an executive position. So my experiences on how I got that position, what I do in that position, is really the perspectives I'm sharing today. And OB Organic is about as male-dominated as you can get. It's a beef trading organisation. It produces and markets beef that's grown in the outback of Australia, where the distances are measured in square miles. The farms are in square miles, and they may not see the animal from birth until it's rounded up for slaughter, so rounded up by helicopter. So very much a male-dominated industry. But interestingly enough, those directors who were mature, male, and beef production specialists saw the need to be really more progressive when it came to being able to market to international markets. So as soon as they started thinking more about their consumers and their customers, they wanted to broaden their board. So I have had that position as a result of that. So when I think about the issue about male-dominated sectors, it's really interesting because you've got sectors like cosmetics, retail, fashion that are completely male-dominated. And you've got sectors like engineering, construction, where you can get female directors. And so it seems to me that part of the story is to do with the sector. And I think the sector makes a difference at the beginning. The sector is about what exposure do men get to female role models and females that they interact with in decision making. So if you're in a male-dominated industry, men are not getting that exposure. But after that exposure, it's really much more about leadership and much more about the model that the organisation's using to access talent. So we do see individual organisations in very male-dominated situations, in construction, in chemicals, in engineering, where the leadership has decided that they must have the best talent available. And once they've made that decision, they can't turn their back on 50% of the population. So that's a much more important factor than actually the sector expertise. And those organisations are leading from a point of view of their leadership. They know where their women are in the talent pipeline, so they start with that point. They are thinking about what skills women need to develop, and they're providing sponsors for those women as well. So they're doing a lot of very active and deliberate things that are helping to grow everybody that's talented in the organisation.
Alice, so with so many years of search experience, does the problem lie here with the way that board recruitment is being conducted? And has anything changed over the years?
You're actually disclosing my age.
Is there more awareness of diversity? Is that bringing change?
Yeah. Look, I think I'm always being accused as, one of those people who probably always have the glass half full. I absolutely kind of think on a global basis, probably even with Hong Kong, there's actually kind of some progression. It may actually not progress as fast as we like it, to be. Let me actually kind of just quickly, kind of quote you some statistics, and then we can actually talk more about that, as well. So, as Spencer Stewart, we're a global retained search firm. So we actually kind of publish these board indexes, which you actually have a hot copy of the Hong Kong index, on your seat there, in 18 different countries, right? So we actually kind of keep all these statistics. When I talk to my colleagues in the UK, for example, look, as much as you actually kind of say, that the number is actually kind of probably still slow, but when you actually kind of look at, the numbers, from 2009, up to 2014 last year, it actually has increased, from, kind of consistently, by 3% every year. To now, up to actually 21%, on the FT 150, there. So it actually has improved, slowly. And even if I actually kind of look at the US, now, I think if you guys actually look at the US, everybody kind of know it kind of stuck at 18, 19%, right? But if you look deep into like the new directors that are being appointed, 1/3 of it, is actually kind of being, are actually women. Well, versus like 10 years ago, it's actually kind of probably, it is actually kind of half of that, number there. So there is actually kind of progress. And as a matter of fact, globally, we placed last year our 2,000, women, on a global board. So there's actually kind of some progression. Now, as much as we actually kind of feel that in Hong Kong, the number quoted today is actually 11%. What I actually have experienced, that, at least I've gone from 9 something to 11%. But when I actually kind of look at the boardrooms around town, having the comply, or explain, regulations, I think it actually have generated some awareness, a fair amount of awareness, in town. In the sense that, with most of the boardrooms, even if they haven't done that yet, I'm aware that there's a fair amount of discussions, that actually have gone on, in the boardroom. So to me, that's actually kind of a first step And I think this whole agenda of diversity, with a lot of the good work by your organization and others, is actually still a rather, new, kind of a new area. So I'm actually kind of really hopeful, that it will actually kind of continue to grow.
Have you seen a pickup in Spencer Stuart being appointed to do board searches?
Okay. Now, two ways that I actually kind of would answer, your questions. Slowly in Hong Kong, okay? Because I think that ultimately go back to a fundamental question, that you and I have talked a lot, about is, what does the board really do? The board really is there to oversee and support management, to execute, to develop and execute the strategy going forward, okay? I think whoever the chairman or the chairperson, is, they absolutely need to have an appreciation that the board is just not a box-ticking compliance exercise that the Hong Kong Stock Exchange said you must have a board. The board is actually kind of there to really can provide advice and help you execute your strategy going forward. I think the link that board really can help in Asia, or particularly in Hong Kong, I think it's not really kind of totally there yet. There's still a bridge to be crossed. I think until then, it would, the number of cases that search firms, not only us, get appointed to do it systematically, will still be actually kind of slow. Have we seen a pick up? Yes, we actually have seen it. We absolutely have seen a pick up. But that pick up might be from 2 per year to 5 per year, okay? So I said actually you can call it a progress, but at the same time, it's still a relatively actually slow progress. That's actually kind of very different, from other jurisdictions. So for example, even if I actually look at the US, it has taken, the recent regulations that got almost every company after the financial crisis. It used to be in the US, that most of the companies will, like us, use a lot of their own network to actually kind of find board members. Since the financial crisis, since some of the regulations, I think people are very concerned about the transparency. So, as such, that people are beginning to realize that I can't actually know everybody. Business is actually kind of getting more complex. Business is changing a whole lot faster. We need to actually kind of do it systematically to actually kind of find the right people.
Host of very interesting side questions coming out of this, but Vivian, can I come back to you? The stock exchange last year did introduce this comply or explain requirement on listed issuers vis-a-vis the disclosure of their board diversity policies. Have you been surprised by the quality of the disclosures in a good or a bad way? Do you think there's a sincerity about this, or is it a box-ticking exercise?
Well, I think the comply and explain requirement is a very good first step, because as a result of that, a vast majority of Hong Kong listed companies now do have a diversity policy, and they do disclose that in their annual report. But that doesn't mean that firms have actually measured how they implement that diversity policy. So it's very good to say that we do have a diversity policy, and when we look out for new directors, we have that in mind. But then there is no measurable goal that is presented to the companies to say, as a result of this, we would like you to implement, a quantitative or numeric goal, and to have a certain percentage of, women being represented on boards. So even though we have that policy and firms do have that, we haven't really seen any significant and sustainable growth of female representation on the boards.
Deirdre, I want to come back to your point about how it's not about the sector, it's about the firm's leadership and culture. When I think about the companies that we were just saying, were doing better when it came to board diversity, HSBC, Link Management, China Resource Power, I mean, that actually underscores what you're saying. I mean, they're in different sectors completely. And perhaps it's more about their leadership. But the other thing that struck me is that none of these companies are family owned and controlled in the way that so many big Hong Kong and Asian companies are. So, tell us a bit more about OBE Organic. I mean, is it a family company? Tell us a bit more about, whether you think, that family control thing is actually a bigger impediment.
For OB Organic, it is a family-owned company, so they have the majority shareholding. So I have experienced that, but I would say, even so, it's an issue of how you look at what business you want to be in, how you're going to succeed. That really overrides those relationships. But I think when it is a family-dominated company or a family-owned company, the history and the legacy is that you are selecting people on the basis of relationships. And when you select people on the basis of relationships, you have the possibility of selecting more people like yourself, rather than people with a diverse background. And that's, I think, the difficulty with family-owned companies, that they fall into that position of relationships, that they're choosing people that are very much like themselves. And I think that's where OB's been very brave. I mean, I'm quite a different character compared to the other gentlemen on the board, and that takes some tolerance. We are in our first year of that relationship, so we're learning how to speak to each other in ways that mean that we get the best of out of the decision making. When they've been together 15 years, so that's the other thing, they're very familiar with each other. But other than that, I think one of the things that I would say, and picking up from Vivian's point, policy is not enough. Policy doesn't make behaviour change, and you really need behaviour change. And in my experience, if I can go on, Sumei, to talk about males and females on boards, I think there are style differences, without wanting to overplay generalisations. There are style differences in the way that men and women approach things. And I think men are rewarded for being confident. They're even rewarded for being overconfident sometimes. So they will easily pick up a new challenge of joining a board when they're not quite sure what sort of contribution they're going to make. Whereas women are much more likely to want to be really well prepared. And I certainly fall into that group. So for me, the ingredients that have allowed me to be successful on a board are more about 4 things. Firstly, confidence. Secondly, skills. Thirdly, readiness. And lastly, persistence. And confidence comes very much, if I take the first of those, comes very much back to the support networks that are available. And I feel that my confidence has been really supported by groups like Women on Boards, like the Women's Foundation, like Community Business, like American Chamber and Australian Chamber, who both have fabulous programs for women. Who all have fabulous programs for women. So if you're feeling you're not really quite sure, really take advantage of those support groups. They're there to help you, and they offer a fabulous range of things, from networks to skill building to opportunities to interact. And that's how you can really get your confidence up. The second thing is get your skills up. Know what boards do. A lot of women don't know what boards do. They've been in a functional silo, and they know what their functional silo does. They know what finance does or HR does, but they don't know what boards do. And they do different things. And as Alice was talking about before, they're about strategy, they're about risk management, they're about governance. So get some exposure. Go write some board papers with somebody else. Go and see what the board does. Present at boards. Start to really get some exposure and experience with what boards do. Find areas you're passionate about. It's very hard to be a director of a company that's making grease for train wheels if that's not something you really enjoy. Because keeping up to date with industry trends and competitors is very difficult if it's not something you really enjoy. So find your passion. I've looked at about 200 board positions in the last 18 months, and I've only applied for 6. Once you have skills, you start to think about what the match is for those skills. And Women on Boards and the Australian Institute of Company Directors both publish lists now, and every month you can go in and you can see the skills that are being required for different jobs. So that's one of the major changes that's happening, that firms are now starting to say, these are the skills we're looking for. So you've got a much better chance of matching your skills to the skills for those individual positions. And then you can discard the ones that are not of interest. So that's part of developing your skills. And as I say, 200 or more positions, of which I've applied for 6. My score so far is I got on the short list for 1, and I've been appointed for 1. So, and that's in 18 months. And in that time, I've been networking, I've been belonging to these organisations. Quite a long process, and that's where the persistence comes in.
Well, thank you very much, Deirdre, for that fantastic list of tips for aspiring female directors. Vivian, I want to look at it from your client's perspective, because you're advising clients, particularly IPO clients who may be looking to pack their board to make it look good before they IPO. From their perspective, or from your perspective as an advisor, when you're advising them for the qualities or the experience to look for, what would be on your short list?
I think from our point of view, usually the clients that come to us are new candidates for IPO. So they're not multinationals which have been listed for many, many years. So their way at looking to fill their boards tend to be slightly more informal. So they're more, or less likely to go to a search firm and then really ask themselves what are the criteria that I'm looking for. So in those situations, I think I won't say that they have any bias against women, but the usual criteria would be talented people with skill sets which are relevant to the industry or to the sector, and another important criteria would be experience. And personally, I think we have women who are talented, who have the skill sets, who are in senior management roles, but it's probably the experience criteria that it's sort of like an impediment for women candidates, because their definition of experience typically would be we want someone who is a CEO in a company in the same industry for the last 10 years, or we want a person who has served on a board of a similar company for X number of years. And we all know that, there are fewer women who are CEOs, who are in very senior position. So by setting those criteria would eliminate a lot of good candidates. And I think, it is really important for corporates, companies to take leadership, as Deirdre say, to ask themselves, is the title as a CEO important? Or should we, have someone who is talented, has the skill sets, and would bring new perspectives to the board, but was not necessarily a CEO and not necessarily having been, on the board before.
So there you have it, the power of the intermediary, actually. But Alice, I want to talk to you about this one, because if women fall short on the experience front, right, then it becomes a bootstrapping issue, because you can't get on a board because you've never been on a board. Therefore, you can't get on a board because you've never been on a board. It carries on like this. So, how can you persuade your clients to look at women who may fall short on the experience front? And, how does experience on an NGO board or a charity, an education board, does that stack up in the commercial world?
Sumi, if it's okay, maybe actually I'll start by talking about maybe sharing with people, how the process, actually works, okay? I think Vivian actually kind of talked a little bit about the companies that actually go IPO. Sometimes that is actually slightly different, only because when they go IPO, they really want the IPO to work. So even if they actually kind of come to us, they are at a lot of times actually looking for a person with a reputation, because it is reputation that they're buying to actually kind of get onto this particular board, and that will help their IPO. So, in some ways you're kind of resigned to the fact that that's what they're looking for. But let's actually kind of talk a little bit about, let's say some of the best practice, companies. How would they actually kind of think about this, okay? So when we actually kind of go in with a client, that actually kind of say, look, we are starting to actually kind of think about renewing our board, which we are just doing, a project on, right now. It's actually an Asian company, although not headquartered in Hong Kong, currently. So we basically, as I said, the board is really kind of support strategy, right? And implementation of that strategy. So a really good board, will have the chairman and the nomination committee to really kind of think about, if this is the strategy going forward, and it might be changing, at times, they will actually kind of take a look at, if this is actually kind of the, strategy, what are the skill sets that we absolutely need to have on the board, okay? Is it, do I actually have somebody, that must have food or big data, which is a really, a really popular thing, these days. And it doesn't actually mean that everybody would need to have all these type of skill set, but it would actually kind of mean that as an accumulation body, this board must have all these skill sets, okay? If I want to, it could be, if it's a food industry, somebody must know food, right? And that might be actually kind of from the executive, from the executive directors. I want to actually kind of build a brand. Maybe marketing and branding is important. I want to leverage big data. So maybe technology is important. I want to expand overseas, and my target, is Asia. I absolutely need somebody, from Asia there. You look through what are, in the next 3 to 5 years. This is my strategy. As such, these are the skill sets that I actually need on the board. And then people typically will look at, hey, what do we have right now? And who is actually kind of, basically, who is going to be retiring? So, and what else should I add? So that's actually what we actually kind of see as the gap analysis. That become a specification, for what we are actually kind of going out to look for. So I think as Deirdre, actually kind of just say, for those of you who are actually kind of looking, to actually kind of go on a board, you absolutely need to know what I am actually interested in doing and what can I bring to the table, there. And then find those companies, and maybe actually it's not that hard, right? Kind of do some analysis, of that type of, the type of companies that you're interested in that industry. What might be actually kind of missing? And if they are listed, on some institute of directors, that may be actually kind of give you a sense of who, what are the companies that I could actually really apply, really apply to. And, I think the hit rate there, could be higher, because then you have something, you then have something offered. You actually show that, what they actually kind of need, on there. Now, going back to your question, on, if I'm not a CEO, if not, I don't actually have the functional skills, if I don't have the experience, what do I actually then do? The fact that this question, is really out there about diversity, in some ways it actually kind of mean a lot of new directors, will be appointed, to the board. And when people actually kind of do this type of skill analysis, they will actually kind of find areas, that, I might actually kind of need somebody actually kind of different. I'll give an example. For example, as I said just now, big data, digital, is actually a very big demand out there for people with, big data or digital experience to actually kind of go on board. Chances are most of these people are probably at best between 40, to 50. Chances are, that these individuals probably have never, sit on a board, there, as well. But, so it is actually kind of the experience needed, and then you could actually really kind of provide that experience, on there. In fact, one of these companies that is actually listed, here, I'm not going to say which one, which is a global company. We actually have recently helped them to find a digital director on the global board. And that person happened to be sitting in Singapore. and is the regional head of a major digital, company there. And he has actually kind of shared with us, not everybody, with that digital skill set can go on a board, which is typically like between 60 to 70 years old, there. So it is actually kind of that chemistry, that say, okay, this is kind of a cool digital guy, but at the same time, this person can also relate, to the rest of the issues that is being considered on the board. And your final question, about will being on a charity board, really help? We think so, okay, in the sense of you have to actually kind of start somewhere. And a board is basically a community of individuals. When you kind of go on a board, there are lots of things that you pick up. First and foremost is to how to listen, right? Rather than to just talk, there. So I think when you actually kind of go to a charity board, right, one of the things that people can pick up is the fact that you can work in a team, you can work in a committee. I think the other thing that will be actually helpful in a town like Hong Kong is Sophia Cow is always looking, for individuals, high quality individuals to kind of go to committees on the government. When you get asked, think about it. If this is something that you actually kind of feel passionate, about, so you can actually kind of get noticed, on it, as well.
I have to ask, were there any women on your short list for your search for the digital native board member?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the eventual candidate was a guy.
It turns out to be an Indian man.
Okay. Okay, so but I mean, Alice, that was like the gold standard, right? Where companies are doing continuous board reviews and they're looking at the gaps and, actively using search firms to do a professional search to fill them. I mean, I think, the vast majority, I'm afraid, of family-controlled smaller companies where the board is built around cozy personal relationships, those board members are going to be there for life, right? So, Vivian, this comes back to you. I want to ask you a question. I mean, part of the problem why the pace of change is so slow is that board turnover is too low. What's your advice to your corporate clients about, should there be term limits on boards?
Well, for publicly listed companies, the directors will have to be re-elected every year. But I think it's just the reality that if a company has a big stake, which is owned by, for example, the chairman and the chairman's immediate family and close associates are all on the board, then the actual turnover would be rather slow. I think it goes back again to, when the board is looking for a new member or the nomination committee is looking for a new member, do they prioritize issues like diversity? Do they prioritize issues like, how to best, reflect the interests of our stakeholders, which are the employees, which I think, with the number of women on the workforce, there must be a significant amount of female employees in the company's workforce. The other stakeholders would be the customers of a company. And I think, surveys say that 60 to 70% of major purchasing decisions are either made by the woman or heavily influenced by women. So by having gender diversity on your board, you are actually looking out for the interests of major stakeholders. So it is really important for all companies to really reflect, when they have a new director, should they just have somebody within their network that they do know, or should they actually, go through a scientific process of, what are the criteria that I'm looking for, and then possibly go to a search firm to make sure that they get the most appropriate person to sit on the board.
Okay, I'm going to ask Deirdre one last question before we open it up to all of you, so get ready with your remarks or questions. So, Deirdre, the reality today is that the people in power on boards, the people making decisions about new board members are largely men. At TWF, that's why we started the 30% Club, because we believe that men are actually very important as change agents and champions. You're a registered psychologist. How can we get more men on board the agenda?
Thank you very much to the men who are here today. I think they're great role models of an approach to diversity. I think when you think about that, people in power are great advocates for other people. And those people in power happen to be mostly men. So it is, therefore, important to have men that are advocating for this as well. When you listen to men speak in these environments, they often talk about very personal experiences. They talk about their daughters. And it seems to be one way that men can actually access what the issues are when they look at their opportunities for their daughters, and it comes to a very personal level. So they become great advocates. And I think when powerful people, and those powerful people being men, are great advocates, it is fabulously helpful for women. And that can happen at two levels. It happens at the broad sort of policy, public issue area, but it also happens with sponsorship. And a lot of the research is talking about the power of individual sponsorship. And I was reading some study that interviewed women who were successful, and they said if they had their time again, they would find more sponsors. And sometimes it's a matter of asking, that women don't ask, perhaps men don't ask, but a lot of people, and men are included, are very happy to be sponsors at an individual level. So some of the organisations we deal with at Towers Watson are starting to have mentoring programs and sponsorship programs in the organisations, and they are remarkably successful, much more successful than you might imagine they are, because the time involvement is not very great, but it's the fact that there's a single individual that puts you first that's really important when it comes to sponsorship. And that can help guide people, keep people on track, keep them from making errors that would be not useful in their career. So that whole issue of sponsorship at the individual level, I think, is very important. The other side of that, I think, is that not only should men be advocates, but I think women really need to be better advocates. We don't celebrate our success between ourselves enough. And one of the very disturbing pieces of research shows that women who are successful and powerful are seen as less likeable. Men who are successful and powerful are seen as more likeable. Now, we've got to get over that. We have to support and celebrate each other. And again, I come back to these support networks that are available. They are there to help you, and they really enable us to be able to take those next steps, and they're very important as well. So I guess it's not only about the men. The men are very important, but we are really important to each other as well.
Okay. Are there roaming mics, first of all? All right. So if you have something to say, would you stick your hand up, and someone will bring a mic to you?
Thank you.
Introduce yourself as well.
Hello. That's better. Andrew Simmons, Harvey Nash, Executive Search. For me, the food's been very good today. The company's been very good today. Panelists have been very good today. But there's one vital ingredient missing, and that's more men. Which links on to the point, and I do appreciate you thanking me just now for attending, and the other couple of guys here as well. Firstly, I think I attend a lot of these events. We do, as a business, attend a lot of these events. But the representation of men never really seem to go up. So, question to the panel today. We've talked a lot about representation of women on board, but how can we perhaps get more men into basically venues like this, discussions like this? How can the women sitting around all these tables perhaps get their male colleagues to attend voluntarily, I may add, to come to events like this? Ideas would be welcome, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Apart from saying alcohol and better food, I think the other part is really to see it as a talent issue. once you see it as a talent issue, you cannot afford to ignore 50% of the talent in your organisation. And maybe thinking back to how this particular event happened, I don't know how many football clubs or soccer clubs or racing car clubs we sent the invitations to. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we just sent it to women's groups. So perhaps we have to reach out a little bit more as well to make sure that we're including men. A male speaker might have also been an interesting addition that would allow us to grill somebody else. But I think seeing it as something that's about the development of every individual to their unique potential and about ensuring that organisations have access to the best available talent in a really competitive atmosphere is very important, especially since Hong Kong is really a global hub. We can't afford to have Asia-only standards. We really need to have global standards. The pressure on Hong Kong to be global leaders in terms of talent is really very intense. And we need to lift that bar so that we are as good as anybody in the world, so that we can compete with anybody in the world.
Can I just add to that? So with the 30% Club, one of the reasons we started it is we knew that male captains of industry were more likely to respond positively to their peers than to a bunch of whinging female activists like ourselves. So what we do is actively search out the companies where board diversity is obviously important. We go and talk to the chairman, business leaders in the company and say, look, it's so important that you guys go out there and share the stories of the fabulous women who are now working in your executive teams and on your boards, the difference that they're making. Share them with when you're playing your next game of golf, right? And we've found that actually that word of mouth is actually very effective. So, we just need more and more and more of that to happen.
I think one thing to take note is that the diversity requirement is not specifically on gender diversity. It is a general diversity of the board in terms of skill sets, perspectives, experience, and so on. So there is no specific requirement that as part of that diversity policy you must have a woman on board. But personally, I think gender diversity has to be a big part of diversity in general. So even though you could have, other forms of diversity, if there is no woman on the board, but if your customers, your employees, you have a significant amount of women, how can you fulfill the different diversified perspectives by not having a woman on the board? This is something I think, different companies will have to interpret by themselves because, again, the diversity policy doesn't have numeric requirements. So it just requires the company to take into account the company's own business and operations and its own business and determine its own initiatives. Which is why from our perspective, if we are serious about really proactively increasing that number of women representation, then we should really ask the regulators or have some private initiatives to think about, whether there should be a measurable goal in terms of gender parity or gender diversity, instead of just talking about, a general diversity policy, which could not include women.
Great question, Kim. And, I'm looking at Fern here because at the time that the Stock Exchange launched its public consultation prior to bringing this requirement, we at the Women's Foundation and Community Business were advocating for people to write in and to say, actually, what's being proposed is way too watered down, right? It's not, first, there's no definition of diversity that says you must disclose at least within, even if you accept that, there are lots of different minority groups that could be represented on your board. Women are not minority group, for God's sake, right? So there should be a specific disclosure requirement on the number of women. We would like people to have to disclose targets, right, as part of a policy. and how they are tracking those targets over time. I think we think it would be very helpful as well if, diversity policy doesn't just hang there on its own. I mean, companies should be asked to articulate how a diversity policy links up with business strategy. I think this is what we're talking about. So, I think the current provision is really weak. And I think we just have to bide our time to see what happens. But I think that, when it comes to a review, we hope that many more people in the community will send in more strongly worded submissions, talking about this. Right. Sorry, you had a question here, and then we'll take a bunch. So, do you want to start? You have the mic. Okay, you have the mic.
My name is Madeline Hughes. I'm the Head of Sales at APSA Services Limited. I wanted to briefly talk about the benefits to the organisation of having women on boards. We've spoken about the benefit for women. We've spoken about the fact that we might be activists or feminists or whatever word you want to use. What we haven't really touched on, aside from you, Vivian, speaking about the fact that a high percentage of consumers are women and they make purchasing decisions, I'd like to talk about the actual benefits to the organisation. So in sales, I'm not going to talk to someone and say, please buy my product because I believe in it. I might say, this is the financial benefit. So lots of research talks about companies who have women on boards do better financially. That might be because the public perceives them as being, gender champions and they want to support that company, or it might be because of women's skills. So from the panel's perspective, what hard benefits do you see for organisations of having women on boards?
Kimberly Cole, Thomson Reuters. So I was going to come back to what you said. I also think that it's not just the problem of women on boards, but women in the executive positions. So how do we solve the pipeline problem as well? Because to get more women on boards, they have to have had senior exec positions to handle the skills that you've been talking about, Alice. One of the things that I thought was a very good learning was from the Male Champions of Change, which is an Australian program as well. And I think part of the problem for the men is that they do say, they'll support, but it's just not easy and they just don't know how to do it, just like we don't know how to really tackle the problem. So there was a couple of key things that came out of the most recent write-up of the Champions of Change. One was that all of the Champions of Change who were invited to speak at a lot of events, they have a panel pledge. So one was that any panel or any time they're asked to speak, they question the diversity of those events. Okay, that's quite a simple and easy thing for them to do. Of the 30 of them, they're attending more than 1,000 events a year. So that's a big influence that they can have on that alone. Another one that I thought was particularly interesting was Telstra, and David Thodey, the CEO, has declared that all positions in the company are flexible. Now that just means that the conversation has to be different, because managers then have to have a conversation around those roles, whether you're male or female, on how or whether that position, how do you make that flexible? So I think there's some ideas that some of it is we need to share knowledge, both as men and women, with tangible things that people can do, because it's kind of how do you eat the elephant, and we just don't know how to tackle it. So I guess I was going to say, I think Deirdre gave us some good examples, but if there are tangible, even small tactical things that people should think about, whether it's the sponsorship idea, and I think sponsorship needs people to share how that works as well. So any more tangible ideas that we can all take away and quote would be brilliant.
Mic to Fern, and then Fern passed to this lady.
Great. Thanks, Sumay, and thanks for that synopsis of our data points at the beginning. That was excellent. Our report is actually available through our website if anybody is interested. We actually are offering it free of charge to commemorate International Women's Day. So on Sunday, which is actually Sunday, and Monday, you can download it free of charge. And then beyond that, there's a small charge, but that's only to sustain the work that we're doing in this area, because we are a not-for-profit organization. I just wanted to share a few insights in terms of the report and some of the findings. I mean, it is promising that the biggest delta since we started looking at this issue has been in the last year. So from 8.9% way back in 2009 to the current 11.1%, that's 2.2% delta over 6 years. So in a place like Hong Kong, which is very, very fast-moving and action-oriented and entrepreneurial, that's really slow. But the delta in the last year is 1.5%. So that gives us cause for some optimism. And I had a really good question yesterday in our press conference. One of the journalists asked me, is the change in the future going to be driven mainly by the big companies that are doing well, the leaders that are doing well, or is it the companies that have zero women? And hopefully both, but I think in terms of the breakthrough is really going to be the companies that currently have zero women. I think once they do take the leap and have at least one woman director, the conversation around the table is going to change, and they're going to see the benefits, and they'll see it for their own eyes. But right now, it's getting that breakthrough with these companies. The third thing I just want to say is the exec directors. So these are directors that are appointed from the company. That number has changed very little. It's been actually stuck in the last 3 years, but just really, really small change just in the last year. In terms of companies with female exec directors. So from 24% to 26% this year, but just additional one company. And the number of female exec directors has just inched again with just one additional one this year. But that is a natural pipeline for women from within the organization to be given the opportunity to serve on the board. And, for, people here, like really, maybe suggest that to your line manager, your sponsor, your CEO, your chairman, because I think sometimes it does take a bit of assertive, convincing that you should be given the opportunity. And if you're not, actually given the seat, ask for the opportunity to come and speak to the board as part of your day-to-day work and present the work that you do and let them see you in action. You need to be, visible to the board. So, that's just a few additional insights. But it's encouraging, but we do need to be doing a lot better. And thanks to the organizations like the Women's Foundation and 30% Club, the exec search firms, there's so many initiatives around town. It does need a lot of concerted effort. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Veronique from HKUST. So just so you know, piece of information, there's actually very few women faculty in high-level education. And we have a women faculty association that is trying to remedy that. But if you think the problem is only in business, you're so very wrong. And given the fact that we have more female students than male students, this is particularly nagging. My question was, do women really want to be on board? Because one of the things that, is very interesting when you talk about the glass ceiling is that something that's often self-imposed and where women don't really want to take on more responsibilities because of balancing your life or maybe something else. And we see a lot of women leaving big companies to start out their own business, where they have more freedom. So just to play the devil's advocate here, do women really want to be on board?
Yes. This is both, of course, but this is both a comment and a question. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bonnie Landers. I've been working with family offices after my banking career. I've headed up family offices for the past 10 years here. So I am rather intimately connected with the Asian private family company. And being on the board of some of those, I can tell you they're changing, so that's the good news. There is the next gen coming. They have no problem with gender diversity at all. And I think there are other good signs. One thing, however, is there is a perception that women are not going to fall in line, that we are vocal, that we... Can you guess? Why am I on a board, right? But it scares them because they've been doing things the same way for a long time. They've succeeded. And we come and start questioning. This is anathema. So I guess my question to our panel is, we know that in order to be effective, we do have to ask tough questions, but in the cultures we're in, and this is, I'm talking from India all the way here, is if we ask those questions, we are perceived to either be criticizing or we are not with the program, we're not with the team, right? So how do we bridge that by being, as Fern just mentioned, assertive, but coming into the culture and getting into a family situation where we know we have to really tread lightly? Alice wants to answer that.
I love to answer this question because I've seen it, there. Okay, I think we also need to reflect on it as well. Okay, you're absolutely right. Two types of dynamics there, and I've had chairman told me that I would never appoint anybody that I actually don't know, woman or man. It's just actually very scary. So I really think we need to reflect on it as much as we actually kind of say, and it's actually true, that it's important to be able to be independent-minded and be able to speak up. Just like any business situation, you need to reflect, on the environment. There's something about what to say, and it's also something about, you probably know it, how to say it. I've seen a very, because when we do the board evaluation, we've seen it, okay? I think I'm just thinking out loud, that's the reason why I want to answer that question, is one individual, who is very, very well known in town. I can say he's on the board of HSBC. He actually react very differently between on a board of HSBC versus on a board of a local board. Okay? It's not that he would shy away about talking about things. He pushed forward, board evaluation in a totally family organization. But it's how you say it. So I think it's actually important that it's not, I've also heard board members say, oh, the last thing is, sometimes people just think they need to say something. They just need to ask the question, be aggressive, on it. I don't think it's about that. It's about being independent-minded and knowing how to couch that question, there. So, as a matter of fact, when people actually kind of first get on a board, it's good to actually listen, first and see how everybody asks the question. I don't know whether you agree with you sit on a fair number of family boards, there. Yeah.
I think you're spot on. You do have to listen and watch the dynamics. And the other thing is to, acknowledge the fact that this has been successful without you there. So easing yourself into the situation, and that takes a bit of diplomacy.
That's exactly a great word. It's actually it's diplomacy on some of these boards, and really acknowledging, that if it's a family business, there's a major shareholder there, and they own part of the business. They are as important, as the other small shareholders. But as a independent, you are also there, not only to serve them, but also to be also the guard, for the independence as well. So you look and you ask.
Or maybe other family members, because it's not one voice in this family. Yeah. There are lots of members, and they have been brought in by somebody in the next generation who's saying, my father needs to change. And I say, thank you very much for that, Pastor.
So it's complex. It's complex. I just wanted to come back to the lady from APSIS, which is, and if I may just answer your question or try to, in terms of the business benefits, these are really well documented. There's research from Credit Suisse, research from McKinsey, better decision making, enhanced corporate governance, their share price. There's research that shows some correlation between number of women on boards and share price improvements and so on. And obviously the affinity for female consumers. For us at the Women's Foundation, what we're really puzzled by is that given these reams of research out there, institutional investors are really very passive when they're faced with an all-male board or an even all-male management team. Why aren't the institutional investors prodding the companies more to change the makeup of their boards? So that's a question. I did have an anecdote that Margie Yang, who was on the board of Gillette, told me as to the value she brought one day to a discussion that they were having about the potential for a female razor. And actually, it was a female razor that they were going to launch in Asia. And she could tell them that actually their projections were way off and they were way too high. So there's the female voice coming through with value. So, I think we have to wrap up now. Just really, really quickly, a few key points from today. I think, it's clear that there are best practices out there, the market leaders. They're doing sophisticated board reviews. They're using professional search firms for board searches. They're being thoughtful about the makeup of their boards. These best practices need to be publicized, and more companies need to be encouraged to follow them. Clearly, sector doesn't matter so much as the leadership culture and appreciation of board diversity. The regulations in Hong Kong could definitely be beefed up. So let's wait for the opportunity to tell the stock exchange that. And last but not least, we definitely need to encourage more male champions. And I suppose, the low-hanging fruit here are any of them who have daughters. So let's get them on our target list, Anne-Marie. Okay, so please would you join me in thanking our panelists? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed this lively discussion as much as I have. If I can draw your attention to some upcoming events, there's a flyer on your table, so we'd love to see you at some more of our events in the future. Enjoy the rest of your week, and enjoy International Women's Day and everything else that comes with that. So thank you all, and good afternoon. Bye.